I woke up that night to the sound of their footsteps, heavy and deliberate, cutting through the silence of our small apartment like knives. I knew what was coming before I even opened my eyes, but hope had died a long time ago. Dad's face was twisted in that familiar, cruel grin, the one I'd learned to recognize as the prelude to pain. Mom followed behind, her laugh low and venomous, like she was savoring the misery she knew she'd inflict. "Get up," Dad barked, shoving me roughly out of bed. "It's time you learn your place." I stumbled, my ribs still aching from yesterday's minor scuffle, and tried to steady myself. I begged quietly, my voice hoarse from the fear and the abuse that had already broken me so many times before. "Please, I didn't. Dad didn't. Let me finish." His hand shot out, and a fist connected with my side. The crack of my ribs splitting made me gasp, pain shooting up into my chest like fire. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath, trying to curl into myself to protect what little of my body I could. Mom's laughter was loud now, mocking, echoing off the walls. "You deserve this. You're just dead weight." I couldn't breathe properly, each inhalation stabbing like knives, but I refused to cry out. If I did, maybe she'd laugh even harder, and maybe he'd hit harder. I counted the blows, each one making me smaller, each one telling me I had no worth in this house, no place in their world. Ours felt like minutes, minutes felt like ours. My son's face flashed in my mind, the one reason I hadn't completely collapsed under their cruelty. I had to survive, if not for me, then for him. Finally, after what felt like eternity, the beating stopped. I lay there, ribs shattered, body bruised, barely able to move, listening to their footsteps receding down the hall. But just as I thought, the night couldn't get any worse. A new sound pierced the darkness, the wail of a distant siren, growing louder with each passing second. Confused, I struggled to my feet, leaning on the wall for support, my body trembling violently. The sound was coming closer. It was a lifeline. A sign that someone outside knew about the nightmare they had created. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. My mind raced, thinking of every moment that had led me here. The years of abuse, the stolen money, the threats, the isolation. I remember the neighbors who had pretended not to hear, the friends I couldn't trust because they never believed me. But now, with sirens approaching, hope slender, fragile hope crept into my heart. I dialed 911. My voice barely a whisper, but trembling with determination. "Help, please, my parents." I collapsed against the wall as I spoke, gasping, tears streaming down my face. The operator's voice was calm, professional, a stark contrast to the chaos in my apartment. She guided me through every step, asking questions I barely had the energy to answer. But the sound of the sirens growing closer made the air feel lighter, almost breathable. I could hear Dad shouting, confused, as the reality of the situation began to settle in. For the first time in years, he didn't have control. Mom's laughter faltered, uncertainty creeping into her voice. I could sense the shift in power, even as I leaned against the wall, bruised and broken. My ribs screaming in protest, the paramedics arrived, breaking through the door, dragging me to the safety of the gurney. I caught a glimpse of their faces, Dad's. A mixture of anger and disbelief. Mom's frozen in shock, and I realized something profound. For once, I was no longer powerless. I had called for help, and help had come. I was leaving the house that had been my prison, carrying the weight of years of pain, yet stepping into a future where they could no longer touch me, no longer dictate my worth. Even as the ambulance doors closed, the image of my son's face stayed with me. I promised silently that I would fight, that I would survive, and that they would never again have the power to break me or him. The sirens faded behind us, but the fire in my heart burned brighter than ever. For the first time, I knew that the story of my life was about to change, and that they would be forced to face consequences they had never imagined. I gritted my teeth, each breath agonizing, and whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." They will regret every punch, every laugh, every word. They will see the price of their cruelty. By the time the police and paramedics had left, my parents were pacing the front lawn, faces pale, hands trembling. unable to comprehend how the night had turned against them. Their screams and accusations couldn't reach me anymore. I was safe inside the ambulance, my ribs still screaming, but my mind was sharp, calculating. Years of pain, humiliation, and helplessness had forged a plan in me that no amount of abuse could crush. Tonight was not just survival, it was the beginning of their reckoning. I spent the next few weeks recovering, both physically and mentally, under the protective watch of social services. It was a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The world outside my parents' house felt unfamiliar yet filled with possibilities. I had no money, barely any possessions, and yet I felt more alive than I had in decades. The moment I was discharged, I knew what I had to do. They had taken everything from me, my dignity, my sense of belonging, my trust, and now it was my turn to strike back, legally, creatively, and irreversibly. I started small at first. I gathered every shred of evidence I could. Their financial misdeeds, years of exploiting me for labor and money, and documentation of the abuse, all meticulously organized. I contacted lawyers, charities, and even former neighbors who had witnessed the cruelty firsthand. They thought I was broken, that I would crumble under the weight of their attacks, but I was planning a comeback so meticulously crafted, it would leave them reeling. Next, I leveraged the one thing they never expected, their public image. Dad had spent years boasting about his reputation at work, his supposed generosity and moral standing. Mom thrived on being seen as the perfect matriarch, hosting dinners, charity events, and neighborhood gatherings. I knew exactly how to crack their facade. I filed complaints that exposed not just the physical abuse, but the emotional manipulation and financial exploitation that had gone on for years. Suddenly, neighbors whispered, colleagues questioned, and their so-called friends turned suspicious. Their perfect lives were starting to unravel, but I wasn't done. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness, fear, and isolation that I had endured. I began controlling access to key accounts, those linked to their finances, their property, even the home security system they had always flaunted. They screamed, begged, tried to manipulate me emotionally, but every attempt to regain power failed. I had turned the tables. I had become the master of their downfall without ever lifting a hand to strike. The most poetic moment came when they showed up at my door one evening, faces desperate, voices pleading for mercy. I opened it slowly, letting them take in the full scope of the life I had built since escaping their grasp. My home, my stability, my son, all intact, thriving, and untouchable. I let silence speak for me as they fumbled for words, realizing that the years of control and abuse had ended. Their regret was visible in every twitch of their hands, every faltering glance. "You thought you could break me?" I asked quietly, voice calm but firm. "You thought years of hitting, laughing, and belittling me would leave me weak?" They had no answer. I continued, "Look around. This is what happens when the prey becomes the predator. Every threat, every laugh you threw at me, it's back at you tenfold." They begged for forgiveness, tears streaming. But I had learned that some lessons are better taught with action than words. I had rebuilt my life, taken control of my destiny, and ensured that the people who once laughed at my pain would live with the consequences of their cruelty forever. Their world had collapsed, not with fists, but with foresight, strategy, and the quiet, unstoppable force of someone they thought they had destroyed. In the end, I realized the true victory wasn't in their humiliation, it was in my freedom. I was no longer the scared, powerless child they had shaped. I was a father, a survivor, a strategist, and a force they could never touch. And as I looked out at my son playing in the yard, laughter filling the space that once echoed with fear, I knew every tear, every blow, and every moment of torment had forged me into someone unstoppable. The lessons were clear. Cruelty always leaves a mark, but resilience, strategy, and courage leave a legacy. They had underestimated me, and now they were the ones who would live with the weight of regret, forever haunted by the power they had so arrogantly thought they held.